everybody, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I am working with some gecko beads. I'm going to teach you guys some fast peyote stitch as well as how to embellish that peyote stitch with this fun spring bloom bracelet. So it's springtime, the flowers are all blooming, it's beautiful and green and lush outside, and I figured let's bloom some flowers here as well. The bracelet, if you want to do this spring bloom bracelet, you can kind of follow along with any of the materials. In the top right hand corner of the YouTube video is a little eye if you scroll over it. What that'll do is give you information about the different products that are used. Also below the video, there's always a description of the video. It says when the video was published, and if you scroll down or hit down in the show more button, we'll give you links to all of the different products used in this spring bloom bracelet. So to do the bracelet, like I said, we're going to be doing peyote stitch. And the peyote stitch is going to be 4 wide with 11 seed beads. The whole strip that we're going to do is going to be the length of your wrist, and then we're going to do an extra clasp. You're going to need a bunch of 11 seed beads. I'm using the green metallic iris color for the base for the one that we're going to be doing together. We're going to build that base of peyote with our 11 seed beads, and then we're going to embellish. To embellish, I have some of the new gecko beads. So the gecko beads are basically almost a small lily petal. They look like a dragon scale, but instead of the hole being straight through the middle, they go side to side. They lend themselves really well to kind of this floral and petal shape. You can see I've already made a bunch of them because you're going to have to make a ton to do this bracelet, especially if you have a larger wrist, but we're going to be using a bunch of the geckos to do so. We sell them in 10-gram tubes. You're probably going to use about 6 grams or so for this bracelet, depending on how full you want your spring bloom or whether or not you want to add other things to it. I'm using, again, the Crystal Maria Full Matted color for my design to go along with that nice green color of the Miyuki 11 seed bead. If you like the color below here, it's the magic purple, or I'm sorry, the magic blue and the crystal silver rainbow all mixed together. And then the Duracoat dark opaque orchid in the Duracoat 11 here on the example. In addition to my gecko beads and my 11's, I also have some 3mm crystals here. And these are the rose color, the Swarovski 3mm. You can also use any 3x4mm rondelles, 2x3mm rondelles, or kind of whatever you have in your arsenal of beading. So this is great because, like I said, we are decorating and embellishing the peyote stitch that we're making. You can use a bunch of different things. I also have sitting here to use when I start to apply onto the peyote strip. I have some 15's in the Duracoat galvanized champagne color. I have some 4mm rounds in the olivine AB color, and these are the Potomac crystal rounds in the 4mm. And then I have some Rizzos here in a peridot matte color. May also want to throw some other stuff in there. That's kind of up to you. Like I said, this is going to show the technique of doing a quick peyote band or a peyote strip, as well as then creating these gecko flowers and applying them on to the actual peyote strip. To close off my bracelet, I have a cup button in the magic orchid color, which has that nice kind of purpley and green color that I'm getting from my matted Maria beads. In addition to the beads, you're going to need some thread and needle. I have a size 10 needle that I'll be working with, and some wildfire beading thread in 0.006 in my green color. You're going to want about 10 feet of thread total. The peyote stitch is going to use up a fair amount, and then also you're going to be using a lot to applique them on, sew them on, as well as to create your little flowers. Because we are creating a bunch of these little flowers, you want to make sure to definitely have handy your thread zap or your thread burner. That's going to burn the ends of the thread down nice and close so you hardly see the knot at all as we build our gecko flowers. In order to thread the needle easier, I do have a pliers sitting handy to pinch down on the end of the thread so that way I can get it through the needle. We're going to begin with me showing you how to make the actual peyote strip. Like I said, if you know peyote already, great. If you don't know peyote, I'm going to teach you how to do peyote. You can see this strip has a little bit of a wave to it. We'll get over and I'll show you that as we do our actual application of our beads on top. But we're going to do a nice straight peyote stitch band for your wrist that then is going to be applied with the gecko flowers. So to start this spring bloom, I want you to dump out your 11 seed beads and get ready to do a long strip 4 wide of peyote. So to start the design, like I said, we're going to do the peyote stitch. I'm going to show you a quick way or quick peyote in order to do the strip a lot faster. Because you need to make the entire strip first, that's going to give you an idea of how many flowers, and as you get ready to create your little flowers and set them down, to have the peyote strip first is going to be a nice way to figure out exactly how many flowers you need. To start peyote stitch, I have a stop bead on the end of my thread. The stop bead is a bead that will eventually come off the end here and will not be included in the project, but is going to stop the beads from falling off. To do the peyote stitch, you can do it however many wide you want, but we're going to do 4 wide for this particular bracelet. Put 4 beads onto your needle and let them drop down next to the stop bead. So those are you that are familiar with peyote, you know that you're going to pick up a 5th bead and we're going to sew back towards the stop bead, going through beads number 3 and bead number 1. We add a bead, we sew through bead number 3, add a bead, and sew through bead number 1. When I do that and kind of make the beads lay nicely, you're going to start kind of that brick wall look that you have 1, 2, 1, 2 of the beads. To come back then and add your next row, you're going to add a bead, and then sew into the bead that is sticking up, which would have been the last bead that you added on the previous row. Add another bead and sew through the first bead from that 3rd row. When you pull that nice and tight, you're done your 4th row, and you're going to start on your 5th row. To start on the 5th row, pick up a bead. You're going to sew through whatever bead is sticking up. So you're constantly adding 2 beads per row and then sewing through the bead that's sticking up from the previous row. Give a nice tight pull as you get to each end, and that's going to make it easy for you to determine exactly which beads you need to sew through. As you continue to sew, you'll notice that it takes some time to sew through and pull the thread through, and you're going to have way more thread than I do. I just have a small section so that way I can show you guys quickly how to continue with the peyote stitch and not pulling through 5 feet of thread. But you're going to have a lot of thread that you're pulling through with each pass. As the peyote stitch gets longer and longer, you're going to have the opportunity to actually start a quick peyote. So the quick peyote is going to be adding, instead of 1 bead at a time, we're going to add 4 beads. If this portion confuses you, completely skip it and continue with adding your single beads at a time to get your peyote strip. Again, because we do need a nice long piece, I'm going to go in and show you how I add the whole entire row at one time. So here I have my peyote stitch that I just finished with the last row. From here, I'm going to pick up 4 beads on the needle. Coming to the opposite end of the peyote, I'm going to sew through that last bead at the opposite side. That sits the 4 beads that I just added kind of right there at the top of the peyote. From here, I'm going to zigzag, going through that last bead towards the center, and I'm going to pick up the second to last bead in that group of 4, the bead that's sticking up in the previous row, and then the last bead in that group of 4, which is going to put me out then at the top exactly where my thread was coming out originally. Again, I'll do that slowly. We have 4 beads now that I'll put on my thread and needle. My thread's coming out one side of my peyote stitch. I'm going to sew into the opposite side, going towards the middle of the peyote. From there, I'm going to pick up the second bead back, and then the bead on the previous row. Pull my thread through, and then my last sew is through the bead, the last bead on the left or on the top side. If you want to, you can go the opposite way, flipping it in my hand. You can sew towards you, then you put your 4 beads on. You're going into the very last bead on the opposite side, sewing back then through the second to last bead that you added, the next bead up on the previous row, and then the very last bead at the bottom, and pull nice and tight. That's going to get you all 4 beads on at one time. So instead of having to pull my thread through 2 times to add 2 beads, I'm pulling my thread through 2 times, because I do it once here, and then I usually have to kind of regroup my thread before I pull it through the last bead to add 4 beads. And at the end of each row, give a nice tight pull. So I'll do one slow time again. I've got my 4 beads on. My thread is coming out the top. I'm going to sew into the bottom through that last bead sticking up. That pulls those 4 beads right there in place. Sewing through the second to last bead, the other bead that's sticking up from the previous row, and then the first bead that I put on in that row, and done. So you can do this rather quickly, rather than doing 1 bead at a time and pulling your thread through and adding another bead and pulling your thread through. When you do the quick peyote, if it doesn't confuse you, you can add those 4 beads pretty much in the same amount of time, going through bead 2, the next bead back from the previous row, and then bead number 1, and adding in your peyote stitch. You get that done a lot quicker, especially because we have to do a nice long strip. So I've already been working and doing my nice long strip here, getting ready for you guys to help you embellish and to show you that quick peyote. If you want to and you end up with 2 strips, you can actually sew those strips together to that way have a longer piece. And I have my strip here on the bottom. If I wanted to, I can join those 2 peyote pieces. And you can see, because of the way peyote is, they'll sit pretty perfectly together. Hopefully learning that quick peyote did not hurt you, and you have an idea now how to do the peyote quickly. What I'm going to do is actually continue on with my bracelet till I get about 6 3/4 inches. That's going to allow me my peyote stitch to fit nicely around my wrist, probably about 3.5 inches. Fit the peyote right around my wrist. And then we're going to get ready to figure out exactly how many flowers you need. And I'm going to show you how to create your flowers in order then to go ahead and apply them to this peyote stitch bracelet. Once you have your peyote stitch completed, and I have my peyote stitch again that it's going to pretty much almost touch on my wrist, I'm going to set it off to the side. If you have a bunch of thread left over, leave it on the actual peyote stitch portion and put it to the side for now. Now it's time to get out all of my gecko beads. So I'm going to get out my geckos, grab another thread and needle if you have it. Also, if you have any scrap pieces of thread that are just a couple feet or inches long, this is a great opportunity to use them up. What we're going to be doing is creating a number of different flowers with our gecko beads. Some of the flowers, if you want to, you can change up the count. Some I have as 6-petal flowers and some I have as 4-petal flowers. Make sure to have your thread zap handy because we're going to be using that a lot as we go in and create these little flowers. So there is a way, if you would want to kind of create these on top of the peyote. I think it's way easier and faster, and they'll sit nicer just to create them off the peyote strip with the thread and needle. You're going to pick up 5 or 6 of your geckos. If you want to do some 4-petal flowers, you can do that too. I already have a bunch of my 4s, so I'm going to pick up, or my 5s rather, I'm going to pick up 6 of my gecko beads. Let them drop down to the very base of the thread and needle. Without overthinking it, I'm literally tying a knot right over left and then left over right, making sure the knot is in between the gecko beads nicely. You may also want your pliers because it gets short, and I'm going to do a nice tight tug, tightening up and pulling that thread nice and tight. You can do another knot if you want, but now you're going to grab your burner, burn down the thread edges nice and close to your little gecko flower. And then in order for you to make sure that you can actually not see that knot of the gecko flower, what I want you to do is take your thread burner, press in the button, which is going to heat it up, and go right over top of those threads. When you burn them down, that creates a little stop on each end and is going to prevent that knot that you created from coming apart. So the cool thing is, just with that little knot and those little 2 knots, you now have one of your flowers completed. So I'm going to take the rest of that kind of scrap thread that I have, go on in and create a couple more flowers. To determine how many flowers you need and how many of these little gecko flowers you need to make, what you can do is grab your peyote stitch piece, and after you have a couple of your geckos made, start laying them out to see exactly how many you want on your peyote strip here. So I have a bunch of these laying out. You can see I'm just going to make about 2 more because I want to embellish with some other things as well, but that'll give you an idea. I have 10 flowers made. I'm going to make about 12 to embellish my bracelet. You may want to make a couple more depending on your wrist size or the length of your peyote strip. Also, if you made your peyote strip a little bit wider, you may want to go in and grab another color of geckos or keep going to create more of your gecko flowers. Again, either groups of 5 or 6, and then simply letting those fall down to the end of the thread, tying that thread into a knot, making a double knot, and then burning down the thread edges. I give a nice tight pull with my pliers, pulling the thread in opposite directions. Go in now, burn down the thread ends, and then burn those little thread ends flush to make a little ball on the end of the flower. That way I make sure the knot that I've created does not come apart. So I'm going to go in, continue making these little flowers. I have 2 more to go. And then we're going to get ready. I'm going to show you guys how we actually are going to secure the flowers onto the actual top of the peyote stitch bracelet. It's now time to add my little gecko flowers to the top of my peyote stitch. So there's multiple ways that you can actually embellish a peyote stitch bracelet. You can treat the peyote stitch like it is just a strip of ribbon or leather or fabric and sew up different places in the peyote stitch after bringing your needle back, sewing through the project, coming out the top, and attaching things to the actual top of the bracelet. What we're going to be doing is actually sewing back through the beads and bringing our thread and needle out between beads in order to embellish. With your thread and needle coming out your final piece of peyote there, once you have your length, I'm going to be sewing a lot on the diagonal. What I mean by on the diagonal is you can see that as you look at the peyote stitch, there's going to be a diagonal line of 4 beads because that's how wide my peyote strip is. I'm going to sew down the strip of 4 beads and exit the opposite side. When I do this, it creates a bit of a wave in the bracelet. That's how you're going to get that wave that's going to be underneath the flowers. When you pull the thread out, then it's concealed in the actual peyote strip and you're not seeing it anywhere. You can see that first kind of wave starting to take place. What I want to do on each section of 4 where I have the wave, I'm actually going to come out just 3 beads rather than 4. So I've sewed down through that line 3 beads and I'm coming out the 4th area here. I'm going to grab my first gecko flower, take the needle and sew through the loop of the gecko. So I'm sewing right through the middle there. And that's going to put my flower onto my peyote strip. To hold it in place, add a 3mm crystal and a 15-0 seed bead and let that drop down. That's going to be the middle of the flower. Taking the thread and needle, I'm going to sew back down the crystal and not the 15-0 seed bead. The 15-0 is just going to kind of hang out at the top there. Sewing back through the crystal, and to move the flower out of the way to show you, I'm then going to sew through that 4th bead. So again, I was coming out the 3rd bead. I added my flower, my 3mm crystal, my 15-0 seed bead, back through the crystal and the flower, and then through the 4th bead at the very end of the line. From here, I'm going to kind of pull up because I kept it off the bracelet so you guys could see it, and pull down, getting rid of any extra thread that may be showing. I'm going to push kind of everything down so it's nice and tight against the bracelet and pull the extra thread, which will pull that 15-0 right on the top of the flower. The flower is now secure on the peyote strip, and it's time to get ready to add the next flower. I'm going to flip over the peyote stitch, and you can see my next line going over from the line that I just came out of to the next zigzag line. I'm going to sew through those 4 beads and come out. Give a nice tight pull, and that's going to pull that flower even in more. Here, when I'm off to the side, you can decide if you want to add another Rizzo or if you want to add one of your crystals. I'm just going to be adding the flowers to start. To add the next flower, I'm going to do the same thing where I go down through 3 beads, going down on that V, and come out those 3 beads before my row of 4. I'm coming out the 3rd bead in that zigzag. And there's really no right or a wrong way and where the placement is going for these. That's kind of up to you. I did one of my groups of 2 or 5 petals. I'm going to do another 5 petal. Adding that in, putting my crystal on and my 15-0, sewing back through my crystal and my flower and then sewing through the 4th bead in that zigzag line of the peyote. Again, kind of pulling up on the 15-0. You want to make sure that it's nice and tight, that you don't have any thread showing, and you're ready to continue and proceed by adding in the next flower, sewing down the line of 4, coming out the end, giving a nice tight pull to tighten it up. You can see it curves it a little bit, and you can see that zigzag going down the next zigzag line and coming out the 3rd bead on that top. The reason I'm coming out the 3rd bead and not the 2nd bead is because I want my flowers to sit a little bit off center so I can see more of the seed beads. That's kind of up to you. So I'm going to continue now going along the whole project, adding in my little flower gecko beads. I'll add a 5-1 next or 6-1 next just to do a variety, and I'm going to continue sewing them down the peyote stitch line. So I'm getting ready to add in my last flower. You can see I changed the intervals a little bit because I do want to go back and add some more bling and some of my some of my leaves in. So I decided to separate it out, just a little bit more. I have my last flower that I'm putting on, and I love the way that this is kind of so free and organic, and you can see that zigzag effect happening. If you do a wider bracelet, you'll see it even a little bit more. And I'm coming down my last bead here and sewing through off to the end. And what I'm actually going to do is add my clasp at this point, because the last thing I'm going to do is come back down the project, coming out in irregular intervals and adding in just a little crystal bling, maybe some of the remaining pink ones that I have here, and then some of the 4mm crystals and some of the Rizzo beads as well. So because of that, I'm going to get ready to add my cup button here on this first end. To add the cup button, I have a couple of my green beads left on my mat. My thread, I'm going to turn it over to the very back of the project. My thread I want to get so it's coming out the very end of the project. And this is also where your tail is, your initial starter thread. I will actually go through and knot that off and get rid of that as we do this as well. So I'm going to grab 4 of my 11-0 seed beads. Actually, we'll go back to 3 11-0 seed beads, 1 of my pink crystals, and then 2 11-0 seed beads. From there, I'm going to sew up through the back of the cup button and out. When I'm on the top of the cup button here, I'm going to add 3 more of my 11-0s and sew down the cup button on the other side. Coming out the back of that cup button then is when I'm going to add in a couple more of my seed beads to get my actual clasp in place here. I'm going to add 2 more 11-0s, sew through that crystal that your thread was coming out of, and that's going to make a little V section there for your button just to hang off right along the edge of the last little flower cup, or the last little flower rather. From here, 3 more seed beads go on, and I'm going to sew over to that last bead of my top side. So I was coming out the bottom bead, now I'm going to the top bead. So I'm coming out bead number 1, I'm sewing into bead number 4. That's going to pull that back a little bit. Retracing your peyote stitch. I want you to trace those last 4 beads. Coming up then and reinforcing the clasp. We're going to sew back through all the beads that we just added. Whenever you have a clasp, and those of you that watch a lot of my videos, you get sick of me saying this and hearing it, I'm sure, but you want to make sure to reinforce the clasp. Nothing is so depressing as getting your bracelet done, wearing it a couple times, and then the thread coming undone near the clasp because you got it caught on something, or you didn't have it quite secure. So at least 2 or 3 times back through the clasp to make it nice and secure. If you are using a lobster clasp or a toggle clasp, you'll want to go ahead and add your wire guard before you actually add on the clasp. Once I get to the original starter end, I'm going to take off the stop bead, kind of pulling it off and out of the way. Sometimes easier said than done. And once I have it off, I'm going to take those 2 thread ends and actually knot them together. Because the thread is green, you won't actually see the knot itself, which is great. After you have those thread ends knotted, I'm going to burn down the short piece of thread because that end is pretty much finished and completed. So get my last little knot in there. Make sure you still need this thread if you want to go back and embellish a little bit. You don't have to go back and embellish, that's kind of up to you. If you don't come back down the line and embellish, you will need to add some thread at the end to do the loop. Or, knowing that you don't want to embellish, you could have added the loop at the very beginning or at the very end of the peyote before you started embellishing. So I'm going to burn off that starter tail, and now I'm going to go back and embellish with some of the beads that I have left. So again, I have these crystals in the 4mm. Just to add some green to it, I'm just going to pop these in every once in a while between my flowers. And same thing with my rizzos. And this is where the kind of have fun and get artistic challenge comes in with it. There's no rhyme or reason to where you're coming through or out of. I'm going to be adding them in the same exact fashion that I did the flowers. So I'm going to be coming out between 2 of the seed beads, picking up a rizzo, and then sewing back down in that line. It's going to exaggerate kind of that zigzag even more. And then when I get to the end, after having added some beads, I'll make my loop and get ready to close off my bracelet. As I come to the end of the bracelet, I wanted to show you guys that I ended up with 10 of the 4mm crystals that I added in between, and then about 20 of my rizzo beads. And I absolutely love how this is turning out. You can see at the back of the peyote stitch that you have a little bit of that wave going, like I said. And I just came out at random places and started to add those beads. And you can see kind of that almost fairy-esque look that it's starting to have. What I want to do as I get done with the project, I'm going to come out towards the end and add in a loop for my clasp. So I'm getting ready to come out kind of right there for the end. And of course I'm getting my thread twisted for you guys, which didn't happen very much at all, which was kind of nice. I'll add one more rizzo on here at the end. And just like we did on the other side, I want to get to the very end of the project. So I'm going to get to the very, very end on that diagonal coming out the very end. From here, I'll make my loop. So to make my loop on this side, we're going to pretty much repeat what we did on the last side. Grab in some of my green beads here. I'm going to grab one more of my crystals out. This time I'll use a green one. Go ahead and put on 2 11s and a crystal. And now I'm going to make my loop. So my loop is going to be about 26 or so of the 11 seed beads. Again, if you're doing a clasp, here's where you would want to put on the clasp as well. If you didn't want to go back and embellish and you just had the flowers on the peyote, then your loop here, you would have to add some thread to the end or have had known that and made the loop at the beginning of the peyote. And really how you add in the extra beads in order to fill in the design is really something that you can't really teach because you're doing it just every once in a while. I kind of had a rule that I added in a crystal between each, whether or not it was a green crystal or a pink crystal. I think I only added 5 or 6 of the pink crystals, and then 1 to 2 of the actual petals to go on the flower. Once I have the seed beads on and I know the loop is big enough, I'm sewing the thread back down through the crystal, adding 2 more 11-0 seed beads, and then going into the opposite end of the peyote. Give a nice tight pull. And now, like always, I'm going to go in, reinforce my peyote loop, and then tie off the end of my thread further back in the peyote project. Once you're done tying off, your spring bloom bracelet is completed. And I love the way the geckos really kind of just make it really easy to design and create. Hopefully you also learned something about doing that fast peyote to save you time and energy when you're creating your original peyote strip. Again, if you need any of the materials to do this spring bloom bracelet, you can go back to the beginning of the video to the little I, or below the video to the little information as well. As always, if you like this video, like the designs, and want to, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, and you'll get regular updates if you want email notifications when we do new videos for you guys on new products like the gecko beads, as well as new products and new designs like this spring bracelet. So the spring bloom bracelet, again, have fun with it. Make it your own, make it wider, make it shorter, and just really have fun decorating up that peyote. You can also shop with me online at PotomacBeads.com if you need any of these materials, as well as stay connected with me on Facebook and Instagram. You can also join our Facebook group. We love to hear from you guys, and it really is all about you. Our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making is a wonderful collection of people that love the art of making jewelry, creating, designing, and are so helpful when you put questions out there and get immediate answers and color selections and everything and under the sun that people are great and helpful with. As always, everybody, thank you so much for watching this spring bloom bracelet. And if you get a chance, have fun creating and embellishing your peyote.